Okay, so it's another Sunday, and we're still with white magic. And if we look at the book, I'm going to go real quickly through group consciousness, coming forward again, page 38, 39. Want to cover into 40, 41. So this is where we're going to start. And so when he talks about group consciousness, which is the consciousness of the great sum totals, is arrived at by man through the development, first of all, of this individual consciousness, which means that your history involves the sum total of the lives of your animal, emotional, and mental natures, plus the spark of divinity. So in that regard, you're pulling all of that. A lot of it drops below the threshold, but by the same token, this is what psychology talks about. And I mean, they've figured out that you've got that id at the base of a brain, then you've got another level that's grown over that, and another level that's grown over that as we socialize and as we've gone through all of that, and that's basically what they're talking about here. If you want to tag it to science, if you want to tag it to the biology, the way we see the human body. And then he will talk every once in a while about, as you make it through certain stages, other parts drop below the threshold. So you just don't think about them every day. Like breathing, that's the best example. And even with some of the majors, when you get into the initiations, the book on initiations, he will say at certain stages, then a section of what you've been functioning with and are where it drops below the threshold because now you've moved up a level. So this process, the only point I'm making here is it's continuing to go on, and we are part of it. So, and we're a little more conscious of it now than you certainly would have been before. And the other point that I want to make at this point when he talks about this is you go through all that, and then you will come to a point where you become aware, the awareness of your group specified for you, that group of disciples working under some mastery who represents the hierarchy. If you've got 9 initiations, which ultimately you do now with his last book, you have 3 sets of 3. And they start out as very large groups. And if I can find the section in Annie Besant, she's got, in fact, I think I copied the page so that I could do it simply. She's talking about the initially a birth, and we still see this because we, in that sac, there's a bunch of little divine sparks, if you will, and you still see it in the animal kingdom. I remember when I was younger, a dog might have 12 puppies at one time, for example. The cats we had 5 or 6 cats at one time. So what she's talking about here, and this is in her chapter 5, Group Souls, she said, generally speaking, a group soul is a collection of permanent triads in a triple envelope of monadic essence. The description is true of all group souls functioning on the physical plane, but gives no idea to the extreme complexity of the subject group souls, for they divide and they subdivide constantly, and the contents of each division and subdivision decrease in numbers as evolution goes on, until at last a group soul includes but one single triad, to which it may continue for many births to discharge the protective nutrient functions of group, but is no longer described as a group. In other words, and we are at that stage as humans. Normally there's one. We birth one at a time. And that's the individuality that has separated out from the initial collective. I mean, let's face it, fish drop an incredible amount of eggs to be fertilized, even now, I think. And they're right in the fluid to start with. They don't need, they're in a big sack of water. So we're down to one, and we're down to becoming an individual, because in that set of initiations, you start out with the group and you end up, and he indicates here even that he thinks that initiation wise, you can do initiation 1 and 2 in groups. This is your physical one, your astral. This is unprincipled matter. But he indicates you cannot do the third. It has to be done individually. And it does, because it's interacting with its own soul at that point. You know, we're not making a mosh pit out of this. It's something where you have individualized. But when that occurs, that's taking you to the mental plane. And when you're done with that third initiation, you're up on the Buddhic plane and you start over again as a group. And then you'll go up one more and you're still in a group. You go up one more and you're back to the individual. Now you're dealing with Shambhala, you're dealing with monadic energy. And he doesn't write a lot about, because there haven't been that many who've probably gotten there yet collectively as far as humanity is concerned. But 7, 8, and 9 is again working in a group, but by number 9, which is the one where you would actually leave, you have a choice of 7 different paths. So you've got to be back to an individual motion there too, of you're going wherever you're going, but you worked together in group form of some sort, preparing for it, if you will. But it's important to understand that we do move from group to individual. We do move from group to individual, and so on and so forth in these cycles. Because I get people who will say, I'll say, well, we're working towards individuality, because most people would be working towards moving up onto the mental level, which now you're more individual, if you will. Oh no, we're going into groups. We're, you know, it's too early down here to force a group. I'm looking over there at Tom, who just about wants to say something. First of all, you're on mute or something.
No, I'm off mute now. No, I'm good. I'm just trying to intently listen. That's all.
Okay.
I had a slow morning this morning, so I'm still waking up a little bit too.
All right. But I mean, we have a lot of growth and development. There needs to be that individual growth and development that takes you to the point where you can get on that mental plane and you can have that experience and work your way up to interacting consciously with your soul. And that is a process where down on level 1 and 2, you're learning, you're practicing, you're figuring out how to be here. For starters, that's a real challenge. I mean, just watch little babies. You know, this is a traumatic scenario, getting dumped in here and trying to figure out how to negotiate.
The collective's kind of a big group.
The what?
That all of humanity are down, you know, whoa, that's a big group.
Yeah, and they've all working on their own individual charts, their own individual agendas, and they need the space to do it. You know, and there is no way that at this earliest stage you can make them all fit a mold.
Right.
Because you never make them all fit a mold in the natural process. They just move into realms where that works better. You know, the battles aren't there. You don't, you're not getting up on the Buddhic plane and fighting with everybody who's up there. You know, that energy doesn't work that way. But down here, you're that soul incarnates for a purpose. It's got an objective, its purpose and its plan, and it's meant to accomplish it. It needs the space to do that without having to fit somebody else's ideology, is basically what I'm saying. So I did want to cover that. Annie Besant basically covers it the best way. There's certainly a lot more material in her book related to it, but I just wanted to pull that out to make the distinguishing that we eventually become individuals, and that's because you're eventually supposed to become a fully conscious unit, or in the cellular structure, if you will, for lack of better description, of this planet. So that's our long-term goal, or it's the long-term goal of the planet of which we are part. It probably is not the long-term goal of most people that you know do not have that consciously in their mind, if you will. So how are you this morning, Melinda?
I'm good. I'm tired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just
A long week?
yeah. Yes. And a long yesterday. It'll be another long today after I leave here. So,
Okay.
but I'm good.
Okay. Let me see where else I'm going here before I get into the actual stuff we haven't read. And so he talks about the hierarchy might be defined as the sum total of those sons of men who are no longer centered in the individualized self-consciousness. That's the lower three worlds. But who have entered into the wider realization of the planetary group life, which means they're now interacting with the energies, ideas, the essence of that spiritual triad and those levels. There are stages in this realization mounting all the way from the tiny group of recognition of the probationary disciple to the completed group awareness of the life in whom all forms have their being, the consciousness of the planetary logos, that spirit before the throne, who manifests through the form of a planet as manifests through his form in the human kingdom. So basically he's saying you're starting to plug into that level of awareness when you have actually built the anakarana and made the connection to the three permanent atoms of the spiritual triad. And then that is the awareness level that you start functioning on. And by that time, there has been a synthesis where I don't think they do as much battle. Although, Bull, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Remember when you read a book called The Marriages of Zones 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then came back to me and said, oh, she must have dropped off because it's a group of 5 books. And, you know, she must have kind of checked out to write another little book here for a minute, not so much on spiritual agenda as the first one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I said, look at the title. Because that was The Marriages of Zones 3, 4, and 5. So
Yeah.
and implying the level of interactions there and adjustments even between those 3, which are a higher reflection Or if you want to start from the top with the little the little circle with the perfect equilateral triangle, the Buddhas of activity, then the spiritual triad's a reflection of that. And so all three of those points have to interact. And but that's exactly what that was 3, 4, and 5 interacting and getting along, but probably not with quite the level of battles that we do down here in the lower 3. But there still was a matter of learning how to interact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they're different. And that's, so if you had your chart on 117, what we're really talking about is, this thing unrolls and but probably gets more chaos as it comes down. We're probably in the more chaotic realms at this point in time, as far as our evolutionary path is. We're on the bottom. So.
You got to start somewhere.
Well, it's good if we believe that, isn't it? Because then we're willing. Besides, what can you do about it? We are where we are, It's like sometimes I people are in a hurry or something, and I'm thinking, where are you going? You're not really going anywhere. Oh, for sure. So if we consider the soul, the unified sentiency, relative awareness of that which lies back of the form of a planet in the solar system, he can say that because basically we've done the whole journey. And that's the collective awareness that we have, is we've been through all of those stages and we're carrying that along with us. So these latter are the sum total of all forms, organic or inorganic, as the materialist differentiates them. The soul, though constituting one great total, is, however, limited in its expression by the nature and quality of the form in which it's found. And there are consequently forms which are highly responsive and expressive to the soul, others which, owing to their density and quality of the atoms of which they're composed, are incapable of recognizing the higher aspects. And again, this is what you push for to move up that chart, to get closer to that soul. You're more aware of it. There's that interaction. That's the driving objective down in the lower 3 planes, I would expect. And some people have that drive and other people don't have it yet. I would expect the people who are sitting right here are figuring there's something they're missing that they need to know about, and something that internally drives them. I had a girlfriend that, and this was way back when, but I'm trying to guess the age, maybe average about 30 or something. And she says, oh no, I know that this is not my lifetime to go develop any spirituality. And I thought, oh, how lucky are you? She was literally building sandcastles, and she probably built them all her life. And she was very artistic and went to sandcastle competitions all over the place, but literally could say, I know this is not my life to do that. And I thought, oh, wow, she can breathe, she can do whatever she wants, and she's not driven to just keep going forward. And for other people, it's there. And it won't let go of you. In fact, when I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, somewhere in there, and I was doing just some very small classes, and I had asked of people who were feeling that to come to this class. There weren't many, but we were having a discussion. And one of the guys who was there, he said, look, you know, I've got my girlfriend, but she knows when the drum beats, I'm gone. Okay. And I remember myself feeling the same way, that, man, when that drum beats, when you hear that call inside of your head, I'm gone. I will respond to that first, regardless of whatever else is going on. And I know my daughter, I think, identified with that in the same way. And she did not choose the Bailey material. When she said she wanted information, she wanted books on something like this, I think I said before, I took her to a bookstore that had every kind of spiritual quest on those walls. And I said, here they are, pick the one that works for you. Pick the one you identify with. And so hers was not this material at all. It's the Tao. And, but even so, she could, in her earlier, because she had some real early development in the early 20s, she could, when that pull came there, that's where she's going, you know. And I think it's pretty much that way for everybody who feels that draw, which is really feeling the power that's in that little monadic, that little divine spark. It's closer to your consciousness than it is to somebody who doesn't feel it yet. They will at some point. So good morning, Franco.
Good morning.
Good. I know you said you're going to be here.
Yes, ma'am. I sure am. Was just getting our supper started outside, so I did that and came back inside here to have my dog jump all over me because I smell like meat now.
Oh.
That's the only way I get his attention, I guess.
Uh-huh. And when on the bottom of 39, he talks about being pulled towards the higher correspondence, he says, there is, first of all, what may be called the spiritual will and the quota of the universal will, which any one soul can express, and which is adequate for the purpose of enabling the spiritual man to cooperate in the plan and the purpose of the great life. There's a second soul quality, which is spiritual love, the quality of group consciousness, inclusiveness, and all of that. And that's because that's the system we're in. The soul is being created in consciousness for all of us. So it is love. It's the union of spirit and matter. It's the process. This is the paramount soul characteristic, for only the soul has as a dynamic factor. In other words, that union and that concept of love. The spirit or the monad's primarily expression of will, with love and intelligence as secondary principles, because of course that monad's always the primary. And the body nature, the personality is paramountly distinguished by the intelligence, and that is the matter, if you will. But the soul is outstanding quality of love, which demonstrates as wisdom, also when the intelligence of the body nature is fused with the love of the soul. And now, finally, I'm going to go to page 40. We've been working on getting here 2 or 3 weeks because there's a lot of stuff to add on. So the monad, and you will have these on that page 117 chart, but that is the first aspect. It is the will. It enables the monad to participate in the universal purpose. In other words, it's through the whole universe, if you will. The second aspect is love, the energy which is poured forth into the soul, making it what it is. And of course, that's because it's putting aspect 1 and 3 together and creating number 2 and the soul. And so the third aspect is intelligence transmitted via the soul and brought into manifestation through the medium of the body. So we have, when it comes to the soul, the love, the method, the monad was the will and the purpose. The soul becomes the love and the method. And the first aspect in this case is held in abeyance, but expressing itself through the mind aspect of the personality, through the Kundalini, which when aroused correctly makes possible the final initiations into the consciousness of the monad. So I'm sure everybody has heard about the rising of the Kundalini. It's just classic in one of the subject matters when stuff comes from the East that you're going to hear about it. And what they're basically saying is the will is held in abeyance. And for the most part, it isn't. It's going to be fully developed in the next system, which is so far off, we don't have to think about it. The second aspect, love, the dominating force of soul life. Through this possession and this type of energy, the soul can be in rapport with all souls. Through the emotional body, the soul can be in touch with all animals or subhuman souls through its work on its own plane, with the mediating souls of all men, and through the principle of Buddhi on the second aspect of the monad. And I'm going to bring in on this one, as soon as I get through with this third aspect, I want to go over to Lipton to talk about how that actually, we now know that we've got the receptors for that to happen. So the third aspect, knowledge. This aspect's brought into touch with the intelligence of all cells in the threefold body mechanism. So I don't know how many of you guys have looked at Lipton. Oh, yeah, I'm probably not gonna have it. This is the biology of belief. Okay, and first of all, this is somebody who's had their little epiphany and their awareness. And a lot of times when somebody comes up with something unique, especially in the realm of science, he's had a breakthrough and he sees something that somebody else doesn't. The physics of consciousness, the same thing. In cosmic consciousness, the man who wrote it had his own level of awareness, but he then went to identify a lot of other people who have that breakthrough and start getting information that is not commonly known in our minds prior to their discovering it and then communicating it either through, in today's world, you can communicate it through a mathematical formula like Einstein did, or some of the other, what we have always held as being important books and important writers who communicate information that and ways of seeing the world that we don't. And so in this case, it was Lipton, and he was in the Caribbean somewhere, and he saw and became aware of recognizing that there are receptors on our cells. In other words, and I'm just going to paraphrase these, the book's out there, you can read it. But in other words, when you want to know, remember when you were in church and everybody was told, God knows everything? You do. Okay. That was absolutely true in that regard. And so here's some of the science this guy picks up of why it can happen, is because he says we have receptors that are the cell sense organs that are equivalent to our eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, etc. And what is that? That's just a reflection of a reflection. We've talked about our 5 senses that we have. And what he's basically saying is, but on the cell, every cell you've got has principally the same thing. It's a mini version, obviously. And it's out there to receive. It's got its range. Just like our eye has a range of light it sees, our ears have a range of audibility that it hears. There's a lot more sound out there. There's a lot more light out there, but our senses are within a range. So are these little cells. So, and it says that the cell's outer surface is monitoring external signals that come to it. Again, I'm just picking parts of sentences here just to get. The cell possesses a uniquely tuned receptor protein for every environmental signal it needs to read. The receptor antennas can also read vibrational energy fields such as light, sound, and radio frequencies. Now he's talking about on the cell, not in your ears or anywhere else, but every cell you have. And it says the antennas on these energy receptors vibrate like tuning forks. So obviously they're picking up vibrations equivalent to the matching vibration that's somewhere. Okay. And then he goes on to say, I'll cover it more completely next chapter, but I'd like to point out now that because receptors can read energy fields, the notion that only physical molecules can impact cell physiology is outmoded. Biological behavior can be controlled by invisible forces, including thought, as well as controlled by physical molecules like penicillin, et cetera, et cetera. And he said that a little bit later in the page that in recent years, scientists realized the importance of the membrane's IMP. They're in fact so important. Studying the way the IMP works has become a field its own called signal transduction. Signal transduction scientists are busy classifying hundreds of complex information pathways that lie between membranes' receptions of environmental signals and the activation of the cell's behavior. And so then that has jumped into what they call the field of epigenetics. And epigenetics actually overwrites DNA in an individual that the overwrite is the impacts you've had in this given lifetime. So and you're going to operate and function off of that story and respond to that story. And I would expect most likely that also then at the time you pass transfers to the soul as part of your collectivity. So the point is there's all of this going on in your physical body all the time. You are tuned in and plugged in everywhere, and probably have not really realized it. But that's also how astrology can get to you. That's how those transits can get there, and actually on time. And because you've got the receptors in whatever dimension we're now going to talk about that you received them, they're there. And so one of the things that's always been important to me is try to communicate to you and help you understand the piece of equipment you're walking around with. You know, it's got to be the most valuable piece of real estate on the planet. We got a lot of them. Okay. But and also he talks about there's no doubt the DNA blueprints stored in the nucleus are remarkable molecules which have been accumulated over 3 billion years of evolution. So there's your collectivity and synthesis of all your experiences that the soul has that keep getting bounced out into the world of humanity every time there's an incarnation, if you will. So, and they get passed around because you got a mother and a father, and there's both contributing factors. So in other words, this thing just spins out. You can do that with your brain for as long as you would like to, playing out the rules of that. That's, I see Tom wanting to do something like that. You would have the mind that would want to go search all that stuff out and figure it.
Curious mind. Yeah.
Yeah, you would want to play that out and see that pattern of what could happen and what might happen. But we're so unique. And I probably, because of this kind of information, you know, we've got a lot of talk out there these days. I don't know what's true, what's not true, but there's been certainly consideration that if you wanted to control people, then you would probably have to figure out some way to kind of plug them into your database and send out the little signals, and human beings would respond to them. I've heard a lot of that too. I have no idea how much of that is valid or not valid, but
Could look at the patents for the television and radio, see kind of how it's done.
oh, okay.
Mm.
It's interesting, and this is probably has nothing to do with the complexity of what you just said. But in the physics of consciousness, he indicates that our consciousness channel and the number of pixels on the television are similar, so that it totally fills up your whole capacity. When he talks about the consciousness capacity. So when you watch it, you're fully absorbed in it. And you could be sitting in a room and you're watching that TV and you're totally absorbed there, and whatever's going on around here isn't that important because you're loaded over here, so to speak. And that he basically saw the two as being similar in size and capacity. So and of course, we, in terms of the history of ourselves, we see that every time an infant is born, you know, they've gone through the entire history of our life patterns, from the single cell all the way up to the complexity of who we are. It's replayed every time in that womb. And you know, our evolution does exactly the same as like in Europe. You will have had the change of a civilization, and whatever your religious site was or something, you would have built the new buildings over the old ones. And we do the same. You know, we don't throw out any of the parts of the evolutionary history that has brought us to where we are. We just keep building over the top of whatever was there before. That's why you see the brain that has 3, maybe now 4 dimensions. I don't really know if they've gotten to finding the 4th yet, although they should be looking in Donnie's head, because he has all of this going on all the time. So there's probably something else being built up there.
I was reading an initiation, Human and Solar, that basically, well, and we all know that there's not a single cell or atom in our, none of it's the same as when we started out, and it changes all the time. But part of the process is building in new, higher quality structure onto the scaffolding as we're going here.
Yeah, because it would be the same.
And we're doing
as
that now, I assume. It seems exactly
all the time.
right.
Yeah, and that's why with the brain, I mean, we've identified some of it. I'm sure we have not identified the more sophisticated part of it. But one of the conversations that Donnie and I had this week was, if you get a download, and eventually it's a download, you're working your way up to the mental plane, up to that soul. And then when you make that connection, if you've done the third initiation, you are on the Buddhic plane. Now you have worked your way up to there. Then what occurs is it's a download. You get the downloads from the spiritual triad. That's the way it is. We are that midpoint. Humanity is. That is the at-one-ment. And we'll probably go into it a little more later. But we're that point that puts together the lower man that's come up this far and the spiritual triad, which is sitting there. We're the bridge. We're the one who can put the two together. Okay. That's what this body's for, is being able to do that. And so do they pronounce it atonement sometimes?
Yeah, that's how they pronounce it.
Yeah, because I've seen it
Yeah.
with the hyphens so many times now for people to understand what that meant, that I just pronounce it at one meant at this point, because they're trying to point out, look, you are the one that can bring these two worlds together, if you will. And that's what you're here for. That's what your development and evolutionary status is for that. I also have a note, this is just an offhanded note, that you really need to love yourself, because then you include all of you in your evolution. And all of you is needed to put your own show on the road. Okay. And if you're interacting and loving yourself, then there's the flow of energy and consciousness that's there that keeps it all alive. You're not denying any part of it. You're not, I think in his extreme at one point, he said, if you don't love it, you hate it. If you're pushing it away, trying to shove it away, which means that you don't have energy. So to be healthy, psychologically healthy, you include all of yourself in your framework. Now, if I can jump to a minute to Donnie, because this is the conversation we had just a little bit earlier, and this kind of works in with that, is so Donnie, you were talking about wondering when this was going to go away, or that part of you was going to go away, or so on and so forth. Can you pick up on that?
Yeah. So I think we wonder, when things are going to happen, why things aren't going faster, why aspects of our personality stay around, and we kind of get frustrated as to why we can't have more control over our thoughts, our actions, and all of those things. And then we were talking about, and I had read that as we move up each level there, that happens normally. It's a natural process. So you don't have to be good going into this. You're going to turn out, you're going to be good after at each level that you hit. And as you hit, and there's a lot there too, because that's the whole Buddhist philosophy about the fetters falling off and all. So there's a lot wrapped up in that. But I think what we had said was you don't have to worry. That's the whole point, right? You don't have to worry about it. We worry about it anyway. And it seems that that's important initially because it's building the required tension. But then you find out that, well, you really didn't have to worry about anything at all at some point. Right?
And then something goes away. Is that
And
part
then
of what
then
you're
it
saying?
falls off. Yeah. And then what you had really were looking forward to falling off, it does fall off. And then, a lot of that chatter that you had hoped when you started the journey, the journey ends up being exactly what you really wanted it to be, right? So there's that period of tension that it seems chaotic, and you don't know if anything's ever really going to happen, but then it does happen. And then it's this amazing transition to where life is kind of happening the way that you always thought it would be.
Yeah, and this is pretty much psychological is really what we're talking about, because it's that you that you live with 24 hours a day, right?
Right. So we're hard on ourselves, essentially. And, we don't need to be so hard on ourselves. It doesn't appear, apparently, anyway, right?
Yeah, well, and in the back of Physics of Consciousness, or not the physics one, the Cosmic Consciousness, where those people who were alive wrote their little stories. And they just had very short-term epiphanies, but whatever they had, they realized they didn't have to worry anymore. Everything was okay. And they weren't sitting there with those jagged nerves and so on and so forth. So whatever that impact had been had changed their consciousness, and it stuck. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, I feel good today and then tomorrow I'm going to worry again. It was a permanent change for them. And it was just, I don't think he was explaining how it came. It just showed up for some people because it's just beginning in the human family, if you will. That's the way he looked at it. It was just dawning on us, just like at some point sight showed up for us. If we were a worm, we probably didn't have two eyeballs like we do now. But we evolved to a point, and then everything is far better on track than one realizes. It's just they may be on a little bit of a track that doesn't matter. It's a made up track. So, Tom?
I was coming in, didn't you? So I'm going to kind of bring up and parlay a real world experience. So I'm in New York with my parents this week. But there was a mass shooting in Buffalo just yesterday at a grocery store. And I just struggle, like, where, or maybe that type of person isn't even on a spiritual path at all. But we talk about how, whether we think we are or not, we're kind of all headed there, right? But I struggle to kind of relate when I hear about people doing something like that, and how, going back to what Donnie was talking about, it doesn't really matter, because eventually at some point, and maybe eons down and multiple lives or whatever, that person might end up in a better place. But I just struggle to kind of understand how someone that does that, something that heinous and evil, can kind of have some kind of linkage to this path that we're all on, if that makes any sense. Like how would what we're doing kind of relate to a person like that? Where are they?
Would it be fair to say that they're allowed to have a bad day?
I would say they've had more than a bad day.
Well, there you
But to
go.
go into a grocery store and just randomly shoot 40 people, it's
Mental illness, man.
yeah.
I mean, just taking a life in general isn't something
Yeah.
that later on it does catch up with you. I don't care who you are. Eventually, one day it catches up with you. No matter how many you kill or whatever, eventually one day it catches up with you, you got to deal with it. But it's a mental illness for somebody like that, I'd imagine.
And I guess it's just something they would need to overcome. But I don't know.
Yeah, and the thing about it is there was a time when that was okay
Hmm.
in the history of mankind. Okay. And it may well be that individual for a moment, because we all know that the history of humanity is sitting in our psyche back there somewhere too, because every so often it gets pulled out. So whether something like that brought it was allowed to be brought up, whether this was drug related, which then we know that we're not even functioning on the same chemistry as everybody else, and the same chemistry as everybody else matters. I mean, I'm going to jump to something less important and significant than that right now, but I've oftentimes told my friends, if you're driving down the freeway in California, if you knew where all those people who are driving right alongside of you are in their head, and this I was thinking like 20, 25 years ago when the drugs weren't so prevalent. But if lithium and stuff like that was coming in for balancing, and if you're off your meds and you don't even realize it, and evidently that can just trigger in an instant. In other words, if you knew who you were driving alongside, you would be more worried and concerned than you were, because we're not all in the same mindset. And
Right.
we're all in different little, some of them chemically induced that could put them back with us in 1980 or whatever the year was. And then some of them that are just have a derangement in terms of the range. Now we're just talking about their range versus where the range of everybody else is. You don't know. So, I mean, we do believe in today's world that there is or we have till recently at least, a standard of behavior of which we can then say there is a mental illness, because they're not within this collective range of standard behavior. But I think it would be fair to say we would expect that anybody who would do something like that isn't in the same, we don't see that as the norm. Okay.
Right.
So there's some reason that this consciousness is out of range.
Right.
But I don't have
probably not well connected with the group consciousness aspect. And there's probably some significant regression going on there too, I think, because my understanding it was racial based. So yeah, they're probably just regressing, like we've talked about before.
or race baited.
Right.
And embodying their lowest aspects of
Absolutely.
whatever whatever energy centers that they're working with. Right?
Well, ask yourself who they are. They're the same people telling you all the other stuff that you don't believe on TV.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that really answers the question that you have, but I mean, again, life, if you will, that first ray energy is sustaining all of this, and it's sustaining that individual's life in the same way it's sustaining each of ours on this planet. So
They just have a lot longer to go, I guess.
It's like it's like a karmic explosion,
Yeah.
something there, you know. Like
And, well, and that's I think we did it. I think we did get to the answer. I was just struggling to understand how someone like that could evolve, like we're trying to do, type of thing, when they regress to such a point. But I think it's a little bit clear more for me now.
yeah, and the thing about it is we're all functioning within this unit, and this unit needs, I think one of the things we're going to get to in the next couple pages or something is there's all these parts of us, but they do work as a unit. And so if one part of it's off, then that's apparent too. So even like I'm saying, if you throw chemistry in there, which throws the psyche off, okay, or the brain no longer functions in its normal routines and routes that shows the same picture the rest of us are seeing at that moment in time, but has been moved and is, I'll use the word distort at this, in a sense, distorted the vision or the assessment or something like that. That's very capable of happening. You know, we don't work instantaneously. And on the flip side, on a positive note, of if you get a download of information here that's positive, it's going to take time, because I kind of throw this at Donnie every once in a while. We're kind of trying to process, if you had a big download, figure you're trying to process it through a compact computer from way back when. You know, that's the positive side. So figure you can also throw, in this case, doesn't take much chemistry, body chemistry, to throw us off, because we scale. If everything's going right, most of our parts scale in accordance with the other ones, and we all kind of live in the same world. Okay, but the chemistry, in fact, I think it's physics of consciousness where he talks about, and I don't know if he was talking about LSD or whatever chemistry would make it so you could look at the fly and you could see it, slowed it down to a point where you could actually see the wings, you know, or the wings would stop. So that sector, whatever's is interacting with that is scaling at a different time than normal. Otherwise you'd see the wings of the fly going very fast. So, and the odds in today's world of somebody like that thing happening and having the body chemistry being off is pretty good. You know, it's what, probably 90% odds that there's some, you know, some chemistry in there that's not happening right.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we seem to be getting a very large influx of that into this country, and probably globally, or a great percentage. I shouldn't say fully globally. China might have a very strong control of that because of its history with the forced opium and their change of attitude about that usage of that when when Mao came in, so. But this country is pretty pervasive right now. Yeah. I think we're having a time when there's been a very aggressive effort to really shake up that astral plane and get those emotions going. You know, for grander purposes than whatever this guy's purpose was. I think that has to be taken into awareness at this point in time too.
Absolutely.
Donnie?
Yes.
That's
You know, there's so much going on there. It's as far as calming the thoughts down, and I think about the beginning of this. When I started picking these books up, and all the emotional responses and all the chit chat that's going on in the brain, and the desires that come up, and how you're really pounded very quickly with all those things. And then over time, however guys want to look at it, or girls want to look at it, meditation and prayer. So in my own experience, and I started out probably praying, right? But my prayers started from a Christian background, turned very quickly to more of a meditation, which was that, and that happened completely naturally for me. So I would sit and pray, and then my prayers got very quiet, and then there was that emptiness. And then as I start reading, then you find out, you need to quiet the mind or the emotions and the thoughts, and let them go by. So there's lots of meditation stuff going on there. And then as we're talking right now, though, what really hit me was, in order to get the downloads every day, every morning, or whenever you want to sit and contemplate, you've got to be in receive mode, and you have to be quiet. There's no option there. So that work is necessary, I think, whatever that means to get to that point, whether you start out praying to get to the meditation, or just looking in between the thoughts for a while. Because I remember, and I would only be able to quiet my mind or my thoughts for seconds when I started. And now it's there all the time. For the most part, a lot of that fell off. So now there's a lot of receiving that can be done. So there's that process. Anyway, just putting that out there. That's what was going through when I was sitting here. It's important to be quiet. I don't know.
Yeah, he makes a statement somewhere in these books that when you do that, then you'll turn subjective. You'll start to look within, and that's when your real awareness and understanding, and throw the word evolution in there, I guess, in a way, starts.
I didn't ever think that it was going to get that quiet. I didn't even think it was possible when I started reading these things and learning about. I'd never thought that it would be so peaceful and just calm and quiet. So there's that. Unbelievable, really.
Probably your wife didn't think so either.
Probably not one. Yeah, for sure. For sure that.
Yeah, that's probably been a great joy for her.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in a very nice way.
Yeah. That changes the environment, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
That really does.
How about you, Bull?
What Donnie said.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of us from this generation probably started out praying, whether it was in war or wherever, in church or whatever. But if you allow, I think we probably all in this group allowed our prayers to turn into meditation, and it just kind of morphed that way. And I don't know, it seems natural. What do you think, Franco?
Exactly what you said, and it ties into what we learned today about cell has a receptor, not like an organ, like the cell.
Hold on, I think you're cutting a little bit, bro.
It feels cellular, like what we talked about today. Exactly what you're saying ties in exactly what we heard today, where each cell you can feel a vibration, and the vibration gets louder as each cell connects. Even the damaged cells in us, like I know, I won't say who has what, but I know like my brain injury, the meditation, there's a certain tone I hit even in church.
Lost your connection.
Oh man, that sucks.
I've got you.
Oh well,
Hear you too.
exactly what you guys said though.
I've had that conversation with just about all of us. I think Tom for sure, Bull for sure. And then, it's, I think, yeah, just a natural progression. And then the quiet, it just builds and builds a little bit more and more. And then it seems to get quiet and stay that way after a bit.
The problem is the ringing gets louder the quieter it gets. That's why I think the big thing for me was coming off substance abuse stuff like alcohol and other things. It was in the pills, it was now it's not as bad. I don't have like the after effects of what comes after the ringing gets too loud. Now the ringing just gets really loud and I just go find a dark place to lay down. But it's that simple now to fix. But the quieter my brain gets, the louder the ringing sometimes gets. It becomes vibrational. It's really almost sickening, but then again, I get injections to help that. So, but yeah, it feels good, like psychologically. It's just the medical and physical part is what I'm trying to heal now. And this is ongoing. Obviously, the spiritual part is ongoing. It's not like, oh, I'm better. No, this is how we stay better, right?
Oh yeah.
And grow.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, we constantly evolve and grow from it.
Yes.
Which could be part why I'm struggling to understand the situation I discussed, because, it's hard for me to kind of reel back to what was going through my head before, now that it's kind of toned down and quiet, like Johnny was talking about, because I'm at peace, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. And it's just hard for me to regress back to where I might have had a lot of noise in my head. And so it's just hard for me to understand how someone like that could do something like that.
They just aired that one piece, though, man. It's happening daily. Chicago every day here in small podunk town.
They get lost in it. Yeah.
There's 5-year-olds or fifth graders getting shot. My firefighter bros are going at it every day. Kids getting overdosed, beaten to death, set on fire. It's happening here in Podunk,
Yeah.
So in a mid-sized town. So I don't know, man. It's off-putting, like you said, to hear about, but at the same time, they don't know what to look for. These people are searching too, and then they get caught up in the shaft of life. And like I said, you would think after like maybe the first shot, he'd be like, all right, that sucked, or the second person or third person, but to shoot 10, like Carla said, it's something is blocking that part of that brain from activating to say that's messed up, or it's just not right at that point, you know?
Well, he's going to have a lot of time to think about that now. So. Okay.
Think about it.
Enough of that. We should move on.
So if I'm on White Magic, I'm in the book, I'm on the bottom of page 40 is where I'm going to pick this up again for a minute. It says, by a close study of the above, which is the first, second, third aspects he's talking about, it becomes apparent in what way the soul acts as a mediator between the monad and the personality. So if you're back with that chart 117, you got monad on the top, okay, of the very chart, if you will, and you've got the personality is the physical, the emotional, and the mental. So that's the lower three planes of what we are, and the soul acts as the mediator. So if you look at the soul is on sub-level 3 of the mental plane, the monad's way up on the top, so you can zip all the way up there, and the personality is the physical, the mental, and the emotional ray structure, if you will. So that's the 1, 2, 3 on the bottom, you know, the third 3 on the bottom that we deal with. Then that soul has to be the mediator between everything below it, which is us. Actually, you know, the little, what we are, I can call them robots for a minute, as far as the soul is concerned. In other words, it indicated it needed an incarnation. So here we are walking around on our 2 feet and our 2 arms and our head and so on and so forth. The soul is in between the two. It's the mediator. And so it is the point that is going to interact between what's above it and what's below it, and try to bring a union, if you will, and the consciousness, because really what we're trying to do is connect the consciousness that's been built below with the consciousness that's up there. And those levels up there are really connected to levels that are beyond our solar system in more of a cosmic base. You will end up getting a little bit of that in here too, here pretty soon. So, and he talks about the personality hides within itself as a casket hides the jewel, that point of soul light, which we call the light in the head. Then this is found within the brain and is only discovered and later used when the highest aspect of the personality, meaning the mind, is developed and functioning. So then the union with the soul is made, and the soul functions through the lower personal nature. That's where the consciousness then is one unit. The soul hides within itself as the jewel in the lotus, that faculty of dynamic energy. So obviously when we're talking energy, we know we're talking a source of something that's above on that chart versus the forces that we function with down here. So the dynamic energy, which is manifested, an attribute of the monad, the will. When the soul is unfolded all of its powers and has learned to include within its consciousness all that is connoted by the myriad of forms that being takes, that's its awareness of all of its history and so on and so forth. Then in turn, a higher or more inclusive state becomes possible, and the soul life is superseded by the monadic life. That would be your point of at one moment, if you will, when it shifts over from just functioning only on the bottom. You know, you're in the well, you can't get out. You have to work your way out, so to speak. And when you've then gotten to that point, been able to have that interaction with the soul, which allows you then to go make a contact point with each of the permanent atoms of the triad. Okay, that's when you will, in turn, when all things have filled into whatever the equation, and I keep using the term equation, of that allows that shift for you to shift up, then it's superseded by the monadic life. That's what takes over, and that would be where you would get when you want to go through the Christianity and you go to Christ and you go to, I think they'll tabulate it as the resurrection. And I say that with question mark because he talks about the tabulations a little differently. But in other words, he came, and I think the final takeaway from Christianity would be that you've got life everlasting. Am I wrong? Isn't that that's what I got out of it?
And more abundantly.
Okay, well, we'll get to the abundant later. Right now, we're everlasting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And that was the point that was meant to be made by his demonstration, was that that you have life everlasting. And so the connection to working your way to getting to that ultimate point where you're fully conscious and can function on this whole physical plane, have control of it, don't have to have a physical body to do that, but you can be fully conscious on that this whole plane, is the point that I believe he was trying to make. Now, I don't know if I can find it. I made a comment to Neil, to Bull, the other day. It's been an assessment of mine for a while. See if I can find it. That Christianity chose to really worship death. They didn't worship the life issue. And the proof of that is that the Christ on the cross, crucified, is what you see when you walk into a church. And that we have been visually seeing that for 2,000 years. That's been in our head, if you will. That's what's been given to us.
Yeah.
Because it very well, there's no reason why it wouldn't have been the Christ with his arms open and life everlasting.
Resurrected. Yeah.
Yeah. But they didn't choose that,
Right.
because that fear works better down on these lower levels. And fear is a control factor. And then you'll know there's something missing, is one of the things that Annie Besant talks about in Consciousness and the Pursuit of Things. So, we need to shift over to that resurrected Christ as the image of Christianity. We need to really focus on, that's what he's indicating to you, that's there, and it's there, but you just got to go get it. Okay. And in fact, DK on 41 says, the great need at this time is for experts in the life of the soul, and for the group of men and women who, undertaking the great experiment and transition, add their testimony to the truth of the statements of the mystics and the occultists of the ages. In other words, that there really needs to be people here on this planet consciously aware and doing this and talking about it. is really what he's saying. So, and he said the soul hides within itself the jewel and the lotus, that dynamic, the faculty of dynamic energy, which is manifested, attribute of the monad, the will. And when the soul has unfolded all its powers, has learned to include within its consciousness all that's connoted by the myriad of forms that being takes, then in a higher turn or more inclusive state becomes possible, and soul life is superseded by monadic. This involves an ability to know, to love, and to participate in the plans of a life which has the power to include within its radius of consciousness not only the sum total of the lives and consciousness of the life of the logos of our planet, but all the lives and consciousness within our solar system. The nature of this awareness is only possible of comprehension by the man who has arrived at soul knowledge. So you need to connect to that first for that other avenue to open up and for you to really connect with the upper half of that chart. And that's where you become the spiritual man instead of the human. Okay. And then he goes on to say the great need at this time is for experts in the life of the soul and for a group of men and women who, undertaking the great experiment and transition, add their testimony to the truth of the statement of mystics and occultists who've gone before them. So he's going to go on with the body, the phenomenal appearance, and he talks about not much need be written here and then, for the body, nature, the form aspect have been the object of investigation and subject of thought and discussion of thinking men for many centuries. Much at which they have arrived is basically correct. The modern investigator will admit the law of analogy is the basis of his premise and recognizes sometimes the Hermetic theory that as above, so below may throw much light on the present problems. But there's a lot of detail in the next 2 pages that are interesting to have. First of all, man in his body nature is a sum total of unity. This sum total is subdivided into many parts and organisms. So when you talked about being a group, you know, and talk about group work, one of the first things I usually throw out to people is, well, I mean, you're walking around as a group, all of these different parts, and like he says, yet these many subdivisions in a function in a unified manner, and the body is a correlated whole. Each of its parts differs in form and in function, but are all interdependent. Each part in each organism is, in its turn, composed of molecules, cells, and atoms, and these are held together in the form of the organism by the life of the sum total. Now, that life, we go back to the first ray energy, that is what always holds everything together. And that is why this planet has been around for as long as it has, if you will. The evolutionary pathways are here because that monadic energy still drives through all of it. It's held, its full expression is in abeyance, but it's here. And that's why the soul keeps staying where it is. It can keep storing what it can store. It doesn't go away. Because, you know, we live in a pretty transitory level down here. I mean, we're awake a certain number of hours, then we're gone, and then we come back. Okay, well, the preservation of that is that first ray energy. That is the continuity of life that you have until it leaves. You know, that's when you're in the casket. But as long as that life is within you and connected to you, then you, oh, there she is. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, sorry. I was up super early and then I fell back asleep.
Okay, well, we are actually reading a little bit of something this time. And I'm on page 42 of White Magic if you have a physical book. And we are kind of looking at our physical body in a sense. He's talking about how it's put together. So, and so the sum total called man is roughly divided into 5 parts of some greater importance than others, but all completing that living organism we call a human being. 1 is the head. B, the upper torso, or that part which lies above the diaphragm. C, the lower torso, or that part that lies below the diaphragm. You got arms, you've got legs. These organisms serve varied purposes, and upon their due functioning and proper adjustment, the comfort of the whole depends. And in a way, we're a little bit of what that was number 7. What you were asking about, Tom, is it has varied purposes, their due functioning, proper adjustment, the comfort of the whole, if they're all working together. And probably what you had in that particular individual, they were not working together. They were really quite out of sorts. So number 8, each of these has its own life, which is a sum total of the life of its atomic structure, and is also animated by the unified life of the whole, directed from the head by the intelligent will or energy of the spiritual man. Okay. Again, that life force is the one that really directs it all. And it is the intelligent will. Now, the important part of the body is that triple division, the head, the upper and lower torso. A man can function and live without his arms and legs. And by the way, when you talk about the upper and lower, that which is above the diaphragm and that which is below, at the time of the 3rd initiation, the activity shifts from the activity of the lower torso up to the above the diaphragm, in the diaphragm, but everything lower shifts up. So in fact, it's rather interesting. My daughter, she got some, I think they were Uranus transits in her late teens, early 20s. So she had a lot of phenomena occur and activity and so on and so forth in her own level of spiritual development, whatever it was. And then she went on to, she finished her college and whatever. And then at one point we were having a discussion, and and this is all her thought patterns. And she said, and I got to a certain point, and then all I had left to do was to have my children. Okay. Because I'm assessing this now. I think that you have your children, well, that entire total function that's below the diaphragm functions. You know, that's where the child is cared for. That's where the growth occurs. That's the interaction of male, female. All of that is happening in those centers down there. And after the 3rd, all that shifts up here. And this area is more dormant and everything's up here. So I think at this stage in time, he indicates later people will think they're children when they decide to have one. It will be a thought process that will bring that about. But at this point in time, it's a physiological process. You know, but that's the difference, is at the 3rd, that shifts up here. So if there's not a heartfelt interest, there's no action below, so to speak, where prior to that, there didn't have to be any heartfelt interest whatsoever. And action could be just initiated without any problem. You know, it had nothing to do with that. Yeah. You guys are sitting there looking, not smiling. You know exactly what I mean. So anyway, yeah, it's not driven by the lower astral at that point. The heart takes over everything after that shift. So. So, connecting back to what I'm reading, the head, the lower torso, each of these three parts is also triple from the physical side, making the analogy to the 3 parts of man's nature and the 9 of perfected monadic life. There are other organs, but those enumerated are those which have an esoteric significance of greater value than the other parts. So within the head, there's 5 ventricles of the brain, or what we might call the brain as a unified organism. The 3 glands, the carotid, pineal, and pituitary glands, the 2 eyes. So within the upper body are the throat, the lungs, and the heart. And the lower body has the spleen, the stomach, and the sex organs. The sum total of the body is triple. There's the skinny bony structure, the vascular or blood system, and then the threefold nervous system. And each of these triplicities corresponds to the 3 parts of man's nature. The physical nature, the skin, the bony structure is an analogy to the dense and the etheric body of man. The soul nature, that's the blood vessels, the circulatory system, are the analogy to that all-pervading soul, which penetrates to all parts of the solar system as the blood goes to all parts of the body. Because this is a system that's creating consciousness, and we're in it, and everything in it is in it. So yes, it's going to pervade everything. And then there's the spirit nature, which is the nervous system as it energizes and acts throughout the physical man, is the correspondence to the energy of the spirit. And that nervous system is used when you get into the physics of consciousness. You see this body creates consciousness, and it uses the nervous system to do it, if you will. And in fact, the biology of belief describes it in, he uses a sandwich, a bread and butter sandwich with stuffed pimento olives and unstuffed pimento olives to demonstrate how quantum mechanical tunneling occurs that creates this consciousness and hits this synapses. That's biology of belief. It's for his students. It's easier for them to understand. And then you can get the same thing in Walker with physics of consciousness, where he actually describes it all in scientific terms of how the quantum mechanical tunneling occurs so that you can get over that brain barrier, blah, blah, blah. But again, all of this that he's talking about can now be brought down to the science and attached to the science if you want it, where they've determined how this really physically happens with your body. And because that's what this body is here for. I mean, that soul ain't just sending down a body to have fun.
That's the vector state collapse, is that right?
After, yeah, but that will trigger that.
Okay.
Right. So those, and in the head, we have the analogy of the spirit aspect, the directing will, the monad, and the one. So it's so important to understand this vehicle we're running around with and what it really does and what it's meant to do. Technically, if we were just really looking at the purpose and the plan of this planet, we would be coming here and thinking this was the most important thing to do, is to go through this evolutionary path. And it would be the main focus on our head, in our minds. You know, obviously it's not. So now, let me get back to Donnie's comment about the abundance. He says life more abundantly, doesn't he? That's the quote. Okay. Most people will think that's, oh, I'm going to get more stuff. Okay. And it's marketed out there many times now. I see programs, or, you know, they found, okay, spiritual development, and we will have more, your life, you'll have more stuff in your life. Okay. Which is not what it means. He's really talking about going all the way up to the top and out the door into the cosmos, into the cosmic realm, into the next level up as life more abundantly. Okay. But not, I want a better car, I want a better house, I want more of this or more of that. That's not the abundance, or a better boyfriend, or, you know, whatever it is that they market out there. But I mean, so what I'm saying is, if we understood what this unit is all about and understand what we're walking around with, okay, and its true purpose and its way, its functionality, I mean, I think we would have a very different viewpoint of life. And then, of course, I guess you run into these realms that Donnie runs into where everything's okay. It's all
More
right.
abundant. It is more abundant. Even if it's gradual, it's much more pleasant.
Yeah. And the people who are in the book, Cosmic Consciousness, that he analyzed or got to write articles, I mean, are seeing the same thing. They're having that experience, that little epiphany, of which there's not just one. I mean, I'm sure that there is a multitude of them as time goes on. But that's the real abundance, but it's most certainly translated down here as, you know,
Crap.
more stuff.
More empty crap.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That really you know, there's a point at which it you know, I mean, some people have their fill of it, some don't. I certainly did. Yeah. Because that stuff runs you after a while. It pretty much runs your life. Yeah. And causes a lot of worry, especially the way finances are these days and the way that supply chains are these days, and everything else. You know, I mean, we're in a chaotic environment of sorts. I have a feeling the World War II was more chaotic, at least maybe for the Americans, for persons who were there, loved ones, husbands, you know, so on and so forth. But we still are in an environment now that really puts a lot of worry out there for most everybody who feels deeply threatened by it, you know, because everything appears to be in chaos at this point. So I was at the brain with its 5 ventricles is the analogy to the physical form which the spirit animates in connection with man, the 5-fold sum total, which is the medium through which the spirit on the physical plane has to express itself. So it's using the brain. The 3 glands in the head are closely related to the soul or the psychic nature. So that's the pineal and the pituitary and the carotid. Now, the 2 eyes are the physical plane correspondence to the monad, who is will and love wisdom, or Atma Buddhi, according to the occult terminology. Somewhere in these books, and I don't know which one it is, it will tell you what the right and the left eye is, which one is connected to the monad and the other one either to Atma or Buddhi. Literally, it's not listed here, but it is listed in this books because I've seen it. The upper body, we have the analogy to the triple soul nature, the throat, corresponding to the 3rd creative aspect, or the body nature, the active intelligence of the soul. The heart, the love wisdom of the soul, the Buddhi, or the Christ principle. The lungs are the analogy for the breath of life, which is the correspondence of the spirit. And so, I mean, that's where so much is made about your breath, your life. I mean, the breath is gone, you're gone, right? The spirit aspect has vacated at that point, which is that life aspect that maintains it no matter who you are, at what level you are in terms of your own evolutionary development, and the life of everything else around here in all the kingdoms. So in the lower torso, again, we have the triple system carried out. The sex organs, the creative aspect, the fashioner of the body. The stomach is a physical manifestation of the solar plexus, is an analogy to the soul nature. The spleen, the receiver of energy, and therefore the physical plane expression of the center, which receives this energy, is the analogy to the energizing spirit. And, you know, they used to take, first of all, when I was younger, they didn't know what the spleen was doing there, but they knew it was there. Okay. And there was also a lot of talk about if you had the spleen taken out, then you didn't have as much energy somehow. And but recently I've run into people who say, oh, so-and-so doesn't have a spleen and he's just fine. And, you know, he's got lots of energy. So whether there has been a change in that, or that just happened to be a fluke or a misevaluation in that case or not, I don't know. But he is talking about that energizing spirit and that spleen receives it. So I just remember that's the history of it that I have known when they've talked about it. So you got this whole body here, and it's got so much stuff going on. One of the things that I was thinking about was the you know, so we have all of these, we have the 5 senses, we have sub-levels of those 5 senses that are, we've got the basic one everybody's got. Then you start developing these subtler, more realms, and the timing of when they develop, you don't really know in terms of when they're active. It's not that you're really aware of one of them. So I was thinking about the timing of how you determine that. And I think maybe more than anything else, when something, the most common one, which is really common, is, you know, somebody will call you and you say, gee, I was thinking about you today. Okay. Or in the days when I had a answering machine at home, but there were no cell phones. And, you know, it might be in the middle of the afternoon, and I'm thinking, oh, somebody just kind of passes through my mind, some idea about them, and I get home and I find out that they'd called and left the message on the phone. Okay, so I'm picking that up. So early on, I mean, that's very common. It's those kinds of things have happened. So when you get Carl Jung, who was breaking off from Freud and went on with his own realm of the collective unconscious and the archetypes and all of that, and he used astrology. Okay, and astrology obviously has been around for eons of time. So, but there's no way in the world that he can talk about those connections, connecting things, and use the word astrology. So he comes up with what one of them serendipity, the other one is synchronicity, and in other words, they got to coin a new word. They got to make it sound. It can't say you're psychic, okay, or they can't get into this material or have the awareness maybe at that point in time that, okay, well that level of that sense is operational now because this kind of event happens, you know, that somebody thinks about me or says. Yesterday, in fact, last night, I was doing something and I thought, oh, I need to call so-and-so and get a piece of information. And I call on the phone and she says, I just got in. I was going to call you because I want to tell you about blah, blah, which was what I was going to call her about. Okay. And so the timing was there and very accurate because she'd just gotten through the door, hadn't had time to dial me on the phone. Then you know that particular level of sensory apparatus is working. You can say, if nothing else, you can just figure out, okay, well, there's another level that's fired up, but it's not going to, it's not on all the time sending you information. It's when some event happens. So you're not necessarily aware of that until you see something that stimulates that. And the other thing I was thinking about when I wanted to talk about this was probably 20 years, no, not quite 20, 15 years back or something. I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was there for the summer, and it's nice and warm, and there's a pool, and there's a group of people sitting at this table. The pool's behind me. Okay, there's a party sitting next to me who has a vision of the pool, and then there's the people looking at the pool, and I don't know who's over here. So we're talking, having a good time, just casual conversation. It's in the morning. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning or something. And the group is varied. There's, you know, I'm older than all of them. I always am anyway. But there's family age, so on and so forth. And for some reason, I turn around like that. And here's the little boy that belongs to the guy next to me who's got the view of the pool. His head is, crown of his head is just finally going under the water. In other words, he's about a year and a half old. He's a toddler. He's just young. And he had stepped into the pool and there was no sound of him hitting the water. And he had bounced into the water and his head was just about, yeah, it was right to here. Everything else was in the water. And what caused me to turn to look, I don't know. I just did, you know. So the odds are some aspect of me was recognizing that, because I said, that should not be. And then his father saw him and rushed and saved him. He probably would have drowned another minute. He would have been gone because he's only this high. And that part of the pool was at least 4 feet deep. He would have never come up again. He had nothing to come up with. So then you just kind of know. So it's like, it isn't that you can calculate it or that you know, those rooms with the red light buzzer goes on when something is okay or it's working or whatever. You don't get those signals. They're just there and they operate when there's a reason for it. So, and as you move up this chart, there's indication that those 5 sublevels, there's one of them on each of those levels for each of the senses you have. So if you're working on the mental plane, then probably the number 3s are more likely to be being activated, so on and so forth. But I'm pretty sure they kind of work around. But there's no clock. There's no way you can definitely pinpoint anything. It's just like Tony's transit. Okay, well, the zinger was at 3 in the morning and it woke him up, even though he'd been watching for it all day, because you don't know. There's no way to measure that like we can with our alarm clock in this realm. You know, whenever the time for something, it's there. We knew within the 24-hour range because it was a transit. But I probably could have known to the minute if I'd been calculating to that level, which I don't. I calculate to a 24-hour cycle and that's it. But they're there. They oftentimes are developing and expanding. But that had been a question I'd been asked, so you don't know for sure. But you all have to have developed senses. When you're in the military, you have to have developed senses. That has to have pushed on you to be able to have a wider ability to scan your environment. Comments from somebody else here. I'm keep talking.
You're so keyed up all the time. I mean,
Nothing to
in
add.
certain situations, you're just like buzzing, you know. So I would imagine there's some development happening on the spot, along with using whatever had been developed before. But yeah, you're just becoming very sensitive to the whole environment at that point, I think.
Yeah, I would think then, I think the circumstances would have to push you.
Yeah, for certain. You learn that. It's put on us from day one, I think, really. You anticipate, you have to, we're anticipating so much. And then that we're anticipating more and more. Yeah, it's a really good, it's a good place to do that.
Stay alert, stay alive.
There you go.
The other thing I would expect you guys have is you looked upward more than once and said, "Oh, help me, God."
It's happened a few times.
Yeah. In other words, and I'm seeing those as pluses for this kind of spiritual development. You kind of get, I'm softened up, so to speak, or whatever. That's not exactly the right word, but what I'm saying is that the majority of the people just live in a pretty standard life, especially in this country. Okay. Where they can fit into systems. Okay, I got a job. I've got wherever I live, I've got my family, and I'm building something, I'm working towards something. And if I keep doing this, then I'm going to get to wherever the goal is that I set for achievement. And there's not too much necessarily has to roust you out of that. As long as you keep that momentum going. In other words, you got the job, you got the car, you get to work, you know, et cetera, and you can keep going. Okay, not you guys. Your lives are not allowed that under those environments. So, where you can get very locked in to that other pattern that of stability that we have here or have had until just recently, that it's hard to get out of. And there's no driving reason why you have to get out of it. And so you're not likely to. Okay, the majority of people are not likely to. You know, I got to just stay where I am, keep doing what I'm doing, and build this. But you guys don't have that pattern. It's been shaken up. It's like you've been turned over and shook out a little bit. Those things are not in place the same way.
You had mentioned that when you go direct to source in those situations, it kind of illuminates the fact that you don't need anybody else to tell you that you can go straight to the source. And so a lot of the philosophies and religions at that specific point in time, whether it falls off right there or later on, you recognize that that's not necessary or necessarily even true. And that plays a pretty big part in what we're, you know, that we can go direct. So there's a lot of implications there.
Yes, there is. And it's important. And in fact, that's one of the things that is really important, and somewhere in my list here is you don't wait. Oh yeah. With this scenario, you don't wait to be chosen. You don't wait for somebody to come and bonk you on the head and say, okay, you're gonna take you'll get to have an initiation this time, or whatever. In other words, you are self-appointed. Your limitations are your own. That's the only thing that limits you, because this pathway is open for anybody and everybody. Okay. But you're self-appointed. You have to make that choice. Nobody's going to come out and choose you that it's your turn in this lifetime or anything like that. Nothing like that. It is just, it's you. And you decide. And then you do the work. You do, you make the choices that lead you down this path, if that's what you want to do. But no one else makes that choice for you, and no one can stop you from doing that except you either. Okay. So you really have a level of freedom that people don't realize with this. And if you understood where this path goes, you would realize how much freedom you really would have. Okay. Because it frees you up.
Incrementally, it seems that you get more and more.
Yes. Yeah, it does. Yep. Literally from pulling yourself up out of the bottom, so to speak, through all these different levels of evolution, from the Maya. He talks about this too in one of these. He probably talks about raising initiations. Yeah, because that's what we've done, is we pulled up and away from Maya is one thing. And then the emotional and the astral planes, and you worked your way to a point where they no longer hold you. So, and I mean, when you're, of course, you're always at the bottom at the same time. No matter where you go up, you're still at the bottom because the ladder's awfully long. I think those choices you have of the paths, you are limited to 7 paths, but they're the 7 paths that the little divine spark came down on in the involutionary arc. And then there's 7 paths out of here that you choose one of them. That doesn't have to be the same one you came down on. They do indicate that. But then you're going at some point, you're working your way off of this planet, out of this solar system, into a larger cosmos. I mean, and that's got to be a real stunner when you would get to a point where they'd say, okay, now where do you want to go? And he says you have no idea what your experience is going to be there, or what you're going to be doing, or anything like that. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about growing up. But you are certainly free from whatever's going on down here at that point. So, Tom, you look like you're entertaining that idea.
What you just talked about just made me think of the MC Escher lithograph. I think it's the stairway one. I forget the name of it. Relativity, where it's the never-ending stairway. You just keep going up and 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 up.
Yeah. And if you got as far back as the secret doctrine again, you could get numbers that are this long of how many years it would take to do some of that. Because she was good about those big numbers, you know.
128 trillion or something.
Yeah, I mean, she's got stuff like that. So it would, you'd be on the stairs for a while, but would probably have a good time and enjoy it. So anyway, no, it's quite a journey. I mean, it's quite a journey that we're talking about. And there's so much. The downloads could be forever. Okay. In other words, it isn't like it's a 3-page document or something, you know. I think, and I don't think you really remember it all, but it's been downloaded into your consciousness, so you have it. But I would imagine a certain amount of that, once you start moving up a little bit, you wouldn't be able to use here anyway. You know, kind of thing.
Who are you going to tell anyway?
That's right.
Who the hell's going to understand any of that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Although there's some of it that's accurate. There really is. And because I will tell you that I went to something like that happened a long time ago. And there were certain parts of it that I went to scientists and I said, look, does this and work? And some of it was already existing science, which I had not known about before, which is fine. Some of it was nuclear science, actually, which shouldn't surprise one when you get to that point. And I talked with people who were in those fields, and yeah, all that was possible. And then actually, again, like connections happen. I had been talking to somebody and they said, oh, you know, I know somebody in England who is working on exactly that. And I happen to have been going to London, already a pre-planned trip. And so I was scheduled to see them, which I did. And we just sat down and talked about, and they were they were actually working with this as a principal, making something happen with it. Okay. And I'm the housewife with the 3 kids. That's all I do. I don't do science. I don't do anything. Okay. And we're sitting here talking, and we're talking about the formulas, because I could see the formulas. I knew what they were. And I said, okay, this is dot, 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 dot. And this is exactly what they're working on. Okay. And they had the same little epiphany. So, I mean, this is not just for one person, you know, and so on and so forth. So, and then there was stuff beyond that, which I could see. And he said, you know, you should really talk to somebody. And I thought, I don't have to talk to anybody about this if I don't want to, you know, it's I've seen it, I'm aware of it, but somebody else is going to come along and figure this out down the line, and they can work with it. I was already working with a company that was doing some heart monitoring in those days before heart monitoring was done. And I saw all of the crap and the challenges and the battles that you do to make something happen in those realms that's new and innovative, because I was working with it day to day on another issue. And I thought, I don't want to be involved in this. You know, somebody else will come along who's far more connected than me and can do that, but it's not going to be me that goes and pushes this one. So, and I believe it turns out that the one that I had been talking with some people in England was the government just came and bought them out and folded it, because it was too would be too disruptive to their economy. Period. So that happens a lot. I think they've done that with a lot of real Tesla stuff and things like that, where there was actually really something innovative to happen, and it's just would upset the economic apple cart. You know, it's just nothing new in that. So
Well, yeah, well, there's like, I believe there's, you know, when after World War II, a lot of the German granted their ways of experimenting were shut down, but things that they were doing then just didn't come about until decades later, but they were already in it. I know there's a lot of like fertility stuff that was being worked on back then that ours is somewhat new to us now. So that's what happens. Sometimes these things are going on and they've been shut down for whatever reasons they've been shut down. And then it's decades later or however much later that it comes to somebody else or other people are working on it. And then you find out that all this science had been worked on and either was dismissed or, you know, buried. So
right.
I can see that happening. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, one of the Raiders of the Lost Arks ends up that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. First one. Yeah. They bury
the
it.
first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Into that big warehouse with all this other stuff. Yeah. And but the information is there, and it's called Patanjali's Cloud of Knowable Things. So when the mind can reach that far, and now mind and brain are different because the brain is the processor here, but the mind is beyond that. It's not, the mind is not contained within the brain. It uses it to process. And but the bottom line is the mind can go out there and pick up this information. It's there, it's sitting there. It's part of the design, because that's all science is, trying to figure out how things. And it's interesting because it's concretized. The energy on the mental plane is concretized, which means 2 and 2 is always going to equal 4. And what does science do? Science comes in and says, we're only interested in repeatable events that can be done over and over and get the same result. And that's not a criticism. What I'm saying is you can have a person have a psychic event because they can see on the astral plane and they're good. And there's very highly developed psychics around. But the scientist comes in and says, we're not interested in that because it's not repeatable with everybody. Okay. And so the only part I'm making here is you've got the astral plane, which is fluid, all 7 levels of that. They have no sectors, no divisions, no nothing. That this just, you know, anything's possible, period, in that energy. You come to the mental plane, you've got the lower mental, which is mixed with some of the astral, but then you have got the soul consciousness, which is very specific. You have got concretized energy, which means that whatever you discover, whatever the pattern and design is, you can go back and you can repeat the experience over and over and get the same result because it's stable. And it's not that fluidness that just morphs here and there. And that's just a side point for the difference between and one of the ways of pointing it out. So, and there's that whole realm of knowledge just waiting for somebody to reach it, to figure it out. I mean, how can any of this material come here? It's because some human being has gotten into those realms where all this knowledge exists and figured it out. And Lipton has his little epiphany, and it talks about it in the book with this biology of belief. Walker talks about his, and basically what it is, and of course, remember, they've been working in science for a while anyway, and Chardin will say the same thing, is all of a sudden, Walker was walking across a field. He's in Maryland, University of Maryland, and he saw the whole thing, how this whole thing works out, that it took him 40 years to put in a book that people could understand. Because he said, I came back to my class the following Monday, all charged up. I'm going to explain to him how this whole thing works. And he says, they're just, none of them got it because he could not communicate it and get it down into the words yet where anybody else could understand it, but he could see the whole thing. Lipton, it was the same kind of thing, where he saw this whole cellular membrane and the receivers and all of that stuff just in a flash or reasonable flash. The download comes because it's sitting up there waiting. And we mentioned before in history, it's the same thing. You got 2 people invent the light bulb, 2 people invent the radio, same time, you know, kind of. So it's there. And when somebody comes along and sees some of that, I mean, this whole ancient pathway is just a journey up that chart that we saw and figuring out all the information. And that's available to anyone and everyone. Okay. But it's just a matter of timing and it's a matter of choice. Because even the guy in Cosmic Consciousness says right now that thing shows up around the age 35. I think he had 35 to 39 or somewhere in there was the majority of that little epiphany or awareness that he documented. And but he said someday it'll be, everybody will have it by the time they're 3 years old, because it will have been in human evolution. He said it's just breaking now, and there's just one in many million that it happens to at this point. It only lasts from a few minutes to a couple hours and then fades away on its own, was his classification for it. Although I think some of the people that like Whitman, he indicated really it had a hold of Whitman. His attitude, I think, was it had a hold of Whitman and he didn't control it. And the authors thinks it should be more controlled, because I think he felt Whitman was out of control probably part of the time because it was overriding, you know, and I have no way to determine that one way or the other than what he said. So, but it's there, and it's definitely true, and it definitely happens. And the journey that Christ came and talked about is real. You know, the way that one gets there is not the way they told you, but it's real. And it is a journey, and it's a journey for everyone that's available to everyone. And nobody owns it. That's important to understand. Nobody owns it. You are in control of your own journey, period. And nobody else can really determine anything about it for you. It has to be you inside that determines. And part of what will happen is, as you start to develop on these other levels, you're going to have experiences, or you're going to see something, or something's going to flash through your mind. And because it's subjective, you're going to wonder, is this really real? But nobody can determine it's real for you except yourself. You could ask 1,000 people and they could all tell you yes. And until you know for yourself, that yes ain't worth anything. So.
Therein lies the freedom you were talking about earlier, right?
Therein lies what?
The freedom you were talking about earlier,
Yes.
because that's all that really matters.
Yeah. And not only that, but at a certain, on this journey, and especially as you move further up, you are no longer in the grips of what other people think. You're going to follow. I'm going to go back to Christ when he says, what does he say? Give unto Caesar what's, I'm not saying it right, but what's due to the government or whatever. In other words, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Was that
Yeah.
the quote?
Yeah.
Okay. And unto God what belongs to God. In other words, you know, you follow the rules in the domains that are there, but if they're legitimate truly rules, okay, and you're going to follow the structure up on those upper planes too, in terms of you're going to work with them, but that's because you're going to become part of them, the same energy they are, so on and so forth. But it's still your journey. And ultimately, you do have the freedom. That's what the Constitution of this United States, the uniqueness of the only spot on the planet that has a constitution that gives you that right and protects you. As it is written, it's meant to protect this landmass as a realm for you to follow that journey. That's really what that Constitution is, why it's so significant.
And you
It's-
always say that we need the freedom to run our charts out. And that includes, you know, all the implications there, which means you're going to have all the experiences, no matter how other people perceive them to be, right? Good or bad or whatever people look at it like. But that was all really necessary to get us to where we're going, right?
Well, certainly, because if as earlier times in history, for example, either with adults could not given the freedom of travel. I mean, one of the Japanese, I'm going to say,
Hold on, Carla. I think Carla breaking up for everybody else too.
Yeah.
You're breaking
It's
up
breaking
on
up.
us, Carla.
I think we might have lost her.
Yeah, I think we lost her. Yeah, I was going to mention, hey, Donnie, sorry about that. I got your email while I was on vacation and about the astrology charts. I just want to let you all know. I hope, I'm sure I missed a big one on that one. So I just wanted to say.
We're
real
going
quick
to do
about
that
mine.
again, man. We're going to be doing all that again, bro.
I just felt like my whole life has been like this kindling, just waiting. And when she gave me my chart, it was that spark I needed. And then as these transits started happening, it became a fire. And now I'm like in the middle of this fire that I'm trying to control of. All right. Some things I just let go, but the most part, because of the way my lifestyle is now with homeschooling and being actually retired and just really trying to minimize how we live, man, life is just incredible. It's like,
Beautiful thing, isn't it?
man, it's just cool. Like I don't have no worries. Like we're living our best life, like, and without having a lot of stuff, you know what I mean? Like she mentioned earlier in this class, I don't need all the extra stuff. It's like, matter of fact, I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of stuff so we can move on to the next part to really be living our dream. You know, like right now we're at the beginning of the dream, but we want to live the dream, and we think we're within a year of that, you know?
Yeah.
Cool, y'all.
We're going to be doing that again because I think we've talked with Carla and we're going to start doing outreach more in terms of astrology with veterans, and the foundation is going to morph and where that will become the focus is astrology and this material, and it's very exciting.
It's cool. You know, my wife actually got her chart done too, and she usually sits in here with me. She just had a huge migraine a minute ago, so she kind of just ditched, but we talk about this all the time. You know, she's actually listening in on the class, and it's been good for all of us, and even my kids. You know, we talk about this stuff all the time.
Hey, we got Carla back.
Yeah, for some reason, my little internet said green, but it wasn't, must not have been strong enough for a moment or something. Who knows?
We lost you there for a minute.
Yeah.
When we were talking about freedom, you know, the freedom that's required to run our charts out.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. And so where I was going with that was back in Japan, the emperor did not allow the peasantry to have a wheel, which meant that they could not go any further or carry more than they could carry, so that there was no progress there, and they were extremely limited, because if they could have the wheel, then they could make a cart and they could put something in it and they could move it. And they weren't even allowed to do that. So when we talk about freedom, we have tremendous freedom now. We have our individual lives, and we can have choices. You can do the kind of job you want if you're, if you can get hired, so on and so forth. Where in Europe, you were not allowed, you had guilds, and you couldn't travel between communities. You couldn't move to another place down the road. And frankly, there's a lot of that still basically exists. I'm in a very small community. Of course, we're Americans, so that's separate. But the Mexicans, and I'm talking about a small fishing village, and there's a girl she's working for the government. She's here. She's got a PhD in veterinary science, and I know she will never be accepted in this community because she's an outsider, and she will be an outsider all her life in this community if she stays here. Okay, as a Mexican, in a Mexican community. Because small villages don't, and they have no room for somebody who wasn't born here. It's still that closed an environment. So, and so they make life difficult for her. And I remember people who had bought a house in France in a smaller community that they were going to renovate, because they had said, oh, we're doing this and we will love to have you come over well, they finally gave the house up because they had made it so difficult for them to even try to renovate that house, because they don't want somebody who's not born in those communities. So, I mean, we're not totally even over that yet. You know, we have a lot of mobility here. We have a unique country in as much as my first trip to Europe was 82. And so you didn't have the European Union yet. And every country had its own currency. Every country, I mean, had its own passport, and all of this. And they hated each other, all their borders. I would get the communication, you know, of this group didn't like the next country that was coming up, because I would travel on the train and stuff. And you didn't have the mobility, you didn't have any of that. And so I come to the United States, I go to Chicago, I've got 6 different kinds of restaurants down the street that are all different ethnic restaurants. You weren't getting that. About the only thing you got different in Europe back when I first traveled was you would have a Chinese food somewhere in every country. But as far as having all of the different kinds of restaurants from the different ethnic communities that you would see in Chicago or New York, they didn't do that. And that's not that long ago. So we we've come a long way, but this country, you know, they've all figured out how to get along together, so to speak, to have all of the different ethnic cultures express themselves in the same section, be it New York City, be it Chicago, wherever, versus Europe. Now, the change of the European Union was predominantly done. I don't know if you know this or not, but the uniformity of that currency meant no more war. Do you know why? Because they couldn't print the money to have the war. Or they couldn't raise the money to have the war.
That's something that we try to teach our kids here since we're homeschooling is what causes a war and how does it sustain? I said, if at the end of the day, the banks could just tell a country, no, we're not giving you money. It would be that simple. But the banks make money.
Yeah, I don't remember which wife it was in the country in Europe, but this is a famous quote. It was Jewish woman for sure, because it was probably related to the Rothschilds, but don't quote me, because it was whomever had the money. She said, there will be no war because my husband's not going to finance it. Yeah. So when they finally got a currency in Europe that, because there's rules and regulations for your qualifications for your currency to begin with, and you can't go printing your own and you can't manufacture your own. So it has to be a choice of the entire European community. And that is what has, was one of the reasons that was a safeguard against Germany or France or whomever's in there, Italy, of going to war with another party in the country, in the collection, was because you got no money to do it with. So, yeah, no, the finances is a whole nother scenario. But unfortunately, I think the powers that be in the European Union are not necessarily what shall I say, pure. You know, let's take a look at the UN. Any large global institution right now that's grown up to the point it is today has probably had influences to it that were not what the original intents were. So.
Well, DK mentioned somewhere that money is, it's important and it's good to have, and it should be used for your spiritual growth and the spiritual growth of those around you. And
Yeah.
that's basically, we got a little bit off track with that,
Well, we certainly have some ideas about volume of it in one place.
Nowhere does it say that money is for war, for you to wage war and to wage war with those around you.
No, I'm trying to find. Well, I can't. This is stupid. Anyway, there's a quote. I was reading it today out of one of DK's books. And it's on page 190, and I can't find which book it was. I was looking at it, where he says, and somebody else you might remember this, Donnie, I'm not sure. When it's definitely not this book. The money changers are the last one to go. In other words, when you're cleaning things up, the last thing that gets cleaned up are the money changers. And we're probably in the process of that right now.
Tom's right in the middle of it.
I sold everything.
Well, but actually I think there's a pretty good possibility from what I hear that the asset-backed currencies are in the process of being instituted over, and that would be the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Ironically, yesterday in church we discussed, or last night in church we discussed new earth and new heaven. And I was totally blown away by that because I had just read that part of Revelation. And there I was in church and they brought it up and I was like,
I have to go. My mom just showed up.
Oh,
I gotta
okay.
go.
She gonna
Okay,
jump?
Melinda, good to
I'll
see you.
see you guys next Sunday.
Hope you enjoyed this one.
I did. Thank you. I'll see you guys later.
Okay,
Bye.
have a nice time. Okay.
Hey, say that again, Franco.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying how with all this being said, that yesterday in church they discussed new earth and new heaven. And I had just read that part of Revelations before church. And so it just made me think of everything that we've been talking about and how there's no such thing as coincidence, and that even the church now is had this line purposely, and I think it all goes back to everything being aligned above us, you know, and around us. So
Yeah, and there's very many places right now where they're talking about this is a spiritual war we're in the middle of.
think about tonight too, with the blood.
And that's actually what's going on. And it's been surfacing in a great number of different places. So that'll be interesting. It's a choice which direction you want to be aligned with, I guess.
Well, we see it here too, is the religion versus democracy, I guess you can say, or religion versus government, or which religion is you forget that our country has so many different religions, and yet it becomes a focus of one. Christianity is at the forefront of what's going on right now here, so I can see where that's happening, where and it's maybe being misrepresented in a lot of things, or people are using it to their advantage instead of using it for what it is. And so I think that's what we're seeing that here. So just globally as well, you're seeing such a shift in people's, in what they're thinking of, what they're receiving versus what your religion is telling you. So you see a lot of differences, and a lot of, even sometimes the religious leaders kind of shift or reinterpret or retranslate things to kind of go with the flow of where humanity is going, or trying to see how they fit in, just to maybe keep everything together, yet separate from everyone else. So it's interesting, because that's what I'm seeing like right now. And I know I'm at the top of a transit right now, and like how things are happening and how I'm seeing them. Not that it's changed, but it's kind of just I'm more open to seeing what's going on, or I'm more aware of things that are happening right now. So and how I'm perceiving it as, this versus that, and what's real, what's true, what settles in. So everything that we've been talking about kind of has been part of that process of what's going on, and how I'm looking at the outside world, I guess you can call it, or the global world in of itself, and what's going on, and how it's affecting other people. And I know Tom and I have talked about it in the realm of where we are for our jobs, how it affects we see more of how people are affected in relationships. Just relationships are changing, and how trying to get people to get along, or kind of seeing them or needing them to change their train of thought. So I feel there's a big shift, to me, big shift happening, or a want for a big shift to happen in what's going on with other people. Because I know we talk about it, and I try to let it go after. I'm like, all right, stop getting frustrated with other people. So and that's part of it too. And then when we were talking about the money changers, I actually went to Italy right before they so they were still in the lira, and they were just transitioning, and then I was there for my honeymoon, where it was then the full oh my god, I don't know the name of it, whatever, the full European so
Euro.
You saw a difference. Yeah, the euro. I'm sorry, I know. I told you guys, I fell asleep, I woke up. So the difference between what I was able to purchase with when it was still the lira versus the euro, and the businesses, and I'm using Italy specific because that's where I was, between both, how much they hate, the smaller businesses hate it, because tourism changed, and they weren't making the money they used to make, and have the American dollar, because some places would let you pay with American money. they're like, oh yeah, we'll take your American, because the exchange rate would fluctuate. So they would just exchange it when it was at its highest. So it may have united them in a way where, like you said, no war, but a lot of people were so affected. A lot of smaller businesses couldn't maintain. But when I'm telling you, my first trip to Italy, I came home with $9 in my checking account and 50 cents in my pocket. But everybody, but I had Christmas gifts and all this other stuff, versus going back the other time where you're like, oh, wait a minute, I have to pay attention to what I'm spending here. It was very different. And how, and even how the shopkeepers or how the vendors treated you, or how, just how they were able to, so the just seeing the change in the economy within a couple of years, because I think it was in a couple of years, because it was within 2 years. So the first time I went was with a friend, and it was like they took both the lira and they just took the euro, and then we went for a honeymoon. It was just strictly the euro. And even my in-laws, when the change was going over in Portugal, they're like, send us what you have and we'll exchange it now for the euros, because your money's going to be worthless when you guys come back to visit. Because after a while, they just did not, the banks wouldn't even take the previous currency even to exchange for a euro after a certain date. And now this pre-child, we traveled a lot. So, and when we went to Prague, they were fighting not to take on the euro. They were still on their own currency at that time. And that was even, we went, I think, for our 5th anniversary. So you're looking at 2009, 2010 that happened. And it was on the news every day, because they were in the middle of that, of fighting not to be transferred over to it. So it's interesting, because Prague was such a war-torn country. Czech Republic, all that, had been part of so many different wars and such a forefront. So to see, when you mentioned that about war, you're like, yeah, these were countries that were like, no, we're tired of people telling us what to do.
Well,
So,
you had to qualify to join. And in fact, I think Italy was selling some of its national land or parks or to raise enough money to become part of the European Union. In other words, there was a lot of things that they had to do a little bit differently, but their idea was they wanted to be up in that economic class also, and have that kind of development. But there were a lot of requirements, because you could only have certain debt to asset ratios, all kinds of stuff that basically to qualify to be part of the, I've been to Italy prior and after and so on and so forth also. But on the overall, and the money changers now, this one is the source, I guess, the changing of the source of the printing press, or the removal of the printing press, is meant to be part of the what's going on. Because I think at this point in time, like, for example, I don't think that the dollar is the reserve currency for oil anymore. It's probably a reserve currency for other things, but not for oil. Which interestingly enough happened on the first day of the Pluto transit for the United States. So if you look carefully at what starts out, you'll know where it'll end, and that'll be around the 6th of December of this year. That whatever started then will have completed basically that process by that time.
And didn't cryptocurrency take a hit this week? I heard like on the radio.
It probably
Like
did.
that, like
It's-
really, really, really bad.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's,
So one of them we went to zero. So
yeah. I mean,
that's
you're,
why I sold 98% of what I was holding.
Good.
I got out before that happened.
Smart.
I mean, they are fiat currencies, so I mean, they're just set of numbers on a digital board. Literally.
Yeah, I don't know if I just seem more aware of the amount of changes and happenings going on.
Oh, it's
like
very
there's-
large. We're in
yeah,
process.
yeah, and just
We
in
are
many
in process.
different areas. So I feel like that's where I am now. Like, okay, is it because I'm feeling more like an adult now? That I'm paying more attention.
You're
Or
in a
am I
transit.
really-
What kind of transit you have
you
going?
know,
Ah, I did
you
do
try
that.
you try to keep your youth and your naivety for a while. So now I the way I'm seeing things, but just actually seeing connections to things. So I feel like that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, is that I'm seeing how so many things are connected, even though I know, like, things are all connected, but then, like, to know everything
Yeah,
is
you're seeing it.
connected and seeing it happening. Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing it more, and I don't know if it's because it's more out there or if it's just the awareness of it.
It's pretty
Probably both.
overwhelming at times. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I remember being pretty overwhelmed, where everybody kind of thought I was nuts too. But it's all there. It's all right in front of you, looking, staring right at you like, hey, wait, is nobody seeing this stuff right here? This whole thing, like this, pull one thread and the whole thing just starts to fall apart. Yeah.
By the way, another idea that I've had for a long time. See, I do not see war and peace as being opposites. Okay. So if you don't have true opposites, a choice is going to be given and the other one won't be chosen. And war and creativity are true opposites. They're both action. They both get something done. Okay. But peace is the condition of an environment. But nobody wants peace. It's like people push for peace. I hear them every once in a while, we want peace. And I'm thinking, God, I hope my immune system doesn't ever adapt that attitude, or it won't defend me anymore. Okay. Literally. Okay. But we're creators, and we're creating consciousness, and we're this evolution is driving us. And we would like a peaceful environment in order to be creative. But if you offer us war versus peace, you're going to take war, because it's going to make something happen. It's going to get something done. And you need to know that the fourth ray is harmony through conflict. So if and the only thing constant is change on this planet. You know that from every atom that's around. So give it some thought, because there's 12 creative hierarchies. If you get into the Treatise on the Cosmic Fire, and probably what I'd assume Blavatsky, and that's what we're here to do, is the union of spirit and matter. It's the constant creation. And that's what we would choose every time. If we had that versus the opposite being war, do I choose one or the other? You're going to choose to do something that you want, that's creative, that comes out of you and the energy that you are. So anyway, it's just something for you to think about.
What's that,
Anybody else
Tom?
have comments here? Please.
It's about, well, let's hear what everybody's got to say, because we've got to probably start.
Wrapping this up.
Yeah.
Well, Carla, war kind of puts you in a position, whatever type of war, internal, external, to create, does put you in a position to create, because you have to resolve whatever an issue is. So if you think about all, maybe the, I'm going to go with science, all the science that evolves from some sort of conflict happening, whether it's medical science, whether it's, technology. I mean, just with COVID happening, my job was like, we can never be virtual, to having to be virtual and it working, because now you had to think outside the box and you had to be creative and you had to make those changes, and it allowed us to make the changes to put us in an environment that we can work through this, as the world changes, we have to change with it. So I think even that is what you can consider war as well, as that conflict, is that it puts you in a position where you have to be creative and you have to, make the changes and something new. And how about if we try this and maybe it works?
That's the Hegelian,
where
that's the Hegelian dialectic, if we haven't.
But what I
Otherwise,
was, yeah.
yeah.
let
what-
it all stay the same all the time.
Right, but what I'm saying is, when you are presented with only two choices, war and peace, the human psyche is going to go for the war because it's action. And it's here to act. That was the part that I was pointing out, is that if you wanted war as destruction versus creativity as construction, then you've got a true set of choices that you can choose between. Because they're both implying some action. But when you throw in, and peace should be the environment that we prefer to be able to do something creative, if you will. But when you throw war versus peace to people, the human psyche on a deeper level will choose the war just because it's going to move something down the road. Something is going to happen. It's going to, one way or another, create some movement forward. So the only point I was making is you don't have a true set of opposites. So you're always going to go to the war. How many people have made peace? Period. I mean, I don't care if you have peace talks in Geneva to end a war. That doesn't mean there's peace in that country afterwards. There's a mess.
Mhm.
But the point is that that was the only point I was making, is you need, if you're going to contrast opposites, you need true opposites. The other one word liner I was going to throw in there is, when we talk about this being a spiritual war, the choice is, do you experience the word live, L-I-V-E, or do you choose to spell it backwards? That's the battle. That's the choice here right now.
And Patanjali, I was going to say, Patanjali says, it's the difference between selfishness and selflessness.
Is what?
So what we're talking about, the duality there, the choice is to be selfish or selfless.
Oh, okay.
Well, I've always viewed war as part of the yin and yang, right? You can't have peace without war. You can't have war without peace. You can't have sadness without happiness. You don't know what happiness really is unless you've experienced sadness, or even your worst, they even go on the extreme, your worst, saddest day ever compared to the most happiest you've ever been. your most happiest you've ever been, in my opinion, is gauged on your most saddest you've ever been. So
Let me throw out a different description of happy, joy, and bliss. Happiness is the integrated personality. Joy is reflected, I mean, you get that from your contact with your soul. And bliss is a contact with the monad. But when the physical, the emotional, and the mental all work as a unit, you've got happy. That's what we describe as happy. Yeah. When you've had conscious contact or some level of connection with the soul, you feel joy. It's far more elevated. And then they talk about the monad and related to nirvana or bliss or however you want to put it.
That's that shit in on there. Right?
I'm glad you said it like that, because there really is a difference between the three of those, and I feel it. I really do feel it, especially when with this group too. I mean, I feel it with this group, but I feel it with people that I'll talk to in the street randomly, and then we start getting in this kind of conversation, and I'm like, wow, it's cool to see somebody that isn't part of our group experiencing this without having the lessons taught to them. They're saying the right words, and I'm like, right on, man, or right on, lady, you know, like that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Tom, we haven't heard from you.
Of course not. You know, you wouldn't get through without hearing from me. So no, just to piggyback on the war aspect though, are we necessarily talking like physical war reality like we're seeing happening over in Ukraine? But this could also be the war like internal, like Melissa was talking about. Like,
Could be,
know,
although I
'cause-
think the one today is just being pushed by a very small number of, a relatively small number of people who have an objective, you know, personal preference,
mhm,
personal pocketbook, personal whatever, you know.
protect your investments. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I just got, I had heard a long time ago that you guys were protecting a strategic metals, rare metals mine in Afghanistan for China.
Hmm.
Okay. And I mentioned it to somebody and they, and I said, hey, you know, and this is a while back, of course. I said, go look it up. Do your research. It's there somewhere. So they sent me a email just like yesterday or something. They evidently had gone to research and it was there. I mean, you know, so that's a war, is that whatever. But really, just that desire, you're going to have the altercation if you can't have the creation of a solution that works for everybody. You know, but the peace is not the choice, is not the different choice, because I mean, where has any nation had internal peace where all the people are at peace and happy, except for maybe some rare island somewhere with a handful of people on it as a possibility, because we push to grow, you know. We have all our own squares, our oppositions to as drivers, period.
So they could look at war as a means to make the changes that they actually want since they couldn't via any other means, perhaps. In other words,
Maybe I'm just,
yeah.
the only point I was making is they're not true opposites. So if you don't give somebody true opposites as a choice, they're going to go for, in this case, war, which is I mean, I wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't that the fourth ray is harmony through conflict. In other words, you're going to go shake that thing up.
right, break it down to rebuild it type of.
Yeah,
mentality, right? Yeah, and that's kind of where I was trying to get to was,
yeah,
if you can't get what you want through a peaceful means, well, let's have a war and break everything and rebuild it the way we want it type of attitude.
yeah. Although I think we had an administration that didn't choose to go that way, because years ago, I was doing some research on the way that they used to have altercations handled over in North Africa and that area. And they would get up on the hill and just tell how they were the greatest and what they were going to do and to them and so on and so forth. It's a war of words. Then they'd come back and said, I really told them. And that was their war. They didn't physically go to war. It was a war of words.
Mhm.
And we just had a war of words for 4 years, but no physical wars. But did not necessarily, the people were not comfortable with words. They must be more powerful than killing people.
Sharper than a two-edged sword.
I didn't hear that.
Sharper than a two-edged sword.
Oh, yes.
Or-
Especially if you had a little clout behind you.
I'm gonna, are we good to, we can continue. I just stop the
It's up to
video.
everybody else.
Who you got, Bull?
I'm good. I'm just sneezing over here.
Tis the season.
Mhm.
Tis the season for sneezing.
All right, we can continue. I'm just gonna stop the video.
All right.